Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming through in a busy TIFF schedule, I assume. So thanks for making the time. Thanks for coming to the African Metropolis panel today. And we have on the panel Steven Markovitz, who is the executive producer of the African Metropolis series. He's from Cape Town and has a very impressive CV and track record of making movies that become very big. I won't rattle them all off, but if you're familiar with TIFF, he was here a few years ago with John Munga's Viva Riva film from the Congo, which became quite big. Then to his left or right from your view is Vincent Moloi, a filmmaker from South Africa. He's from Soweto, the famous township next to Johannesburg. And he's done a lot of documentaries and TV series. And he's in the project with a short film called Berea. And then we have Jim Chuchu, who's a multi-talent, I should say. He's a musician, part of a band called Just a Band. He's done photography, he's done all kinds of things, and now he turned to filmmaking. And this is his first fiction film and his first festival, and he made it right into Toronto, so we're very proud of him. He made a film in a series called Homecoming. So let me start with Steven. You approached the Goethe-Institut about 2 years ago to make African Metropolis. What on earth were you thinking?
I'm still trying to work that out. Well, I had nothing else to do at the time. No, seriously, about 4 years ago we did a project called Latitude with the Goethe-Institut, where I executive produced 13 short films, and I came on like halfway through the project, and some of the films did really well. They went to Sundance and other festivals, but I thought, you know, we could do a lot better, and it's worth, if we start early, to kind of conceptualize and try and pull a development program together with production. And the general thinking behind it was that, you know, a lot of African filmmakers, or I suppose filmmakers all over the world, take 5 to 7 years to make their films, and often they don't raise all the money, and their films come out and they're not fully realized, and they're not really supported, and it's a very, you know, the films often don't do justice to their initial vision. So our thinking was to kind of take a step back from that and say, let's try and make some good short films in a program where there is proper development support and marketing support. And we partnered with the Rotterdam Film Festival and the Durban Festival, so we were assured before the films were made that they had at least a European platform and an African platform, and to kind of work with filmmakers to make films that can help them make their feature films. It will hopefully be easier for them now because the films are getting some attention, that you know, there's some kind of brand behind it. So that was the general thinking behind it. And also to say, I mean, we worked well with the Goethe the first time, so it made sense to try and do something again.
And the theme is African Metropolis. What was the thinking behind that?
The theme was, you know, if you look at Africa today, just very recently in terms of demographics, over 50% of Africans now live in cities, which is, and it's shifting really fast, and there are these mega cities developing, and people, you know, if you look at the history of African cinema, if you watched African films over the years, most of the films are kind of rural stories, and there's very little kind of urban cinema that's been happening, and culture is changing really fast. The world's becoming more globalized, people are traveling a lot more, there are new kind of subcultures forming in these cities. So we thought it would be really interesting to start looking at stories from cities and how they reflect this changing culture or the changing point of view of filmmakers.
And It's three of 6 films are selected here in Toronto.
Yes.
There's 6 films from 6 African cities. How were they selected, the cities and the filmmakers?
Well, we decided to do a closed call because often when you do an open call, and Keisha from Africa First can attest to this, you get hundreds of proposals. It's a big administrative task, and you create all these expectations that you're only going to choose a few of them, and generally most of the proposals are not really ready to kind of be making those films, or they're kind of underdeveloped. So we took a view, let's try and do a closed call. So we actually chose 8 cities, and we asked 5 filmmakers. It was the Goethe-Institut, myself, and the Hubert Bals Fund of the Rotterdam Festival, and we all have different networks. We put the names together. We asked people who know a lot about certain regions, and we invited 5 filmmakers from each city to pitch with a kind of synopsis, treatment, and director's vision and their previous work. And on that basis, we selected the filmmakers.
And which cities are?
The 6.
Yeah.
Okay. Johannesburg, Nairobi, Cairo, Dakar, Abidjan, and
Lagos.
Lagos. How could I forget?
and why these 6?
I think we had a big debate. There was a tension between 2 main criteria. The one was, are these kind of big cities and forward-looking cities, iconic cities, cities that conjure up something in your mind and there's something interesting going on there, and are there pools of talented filmmakers there? So it was a kind of toss-up between those 2 things, and we wanted to kind of be kind of geographically represented, but as well as choose cities that conjure up something in your mind, and hopefully find filmmakers that are talented, which I think we achieved. So that was the kind of main criteria around that.
Jim, can I ask you, on the first short film package that Steven mentioned, Latitude, there was also a Kenyan filmmaker who also made a bit of a sci-fi fantasy film, and your film Homecoming is also, I don't know if you would brand it that way, but a bit of a fantasy, science fiction story. Is there, how come Kenyans seem so attracted to science fiction?
First, I don't know if I'd brand it a science fiction film. I think of it more as a love story of some kind. As to Kenyans being more interested in sci-fi, I am not sure about that. Wanuri's film was like the first science fiction film ever done in Kenya. Even now, there have been no follow-ups in that kind of style. So the other day, some reporter asked me the same question, like, why are you doing science fiction? And I think it's just an accident.
So what does the film scene like in Kenya? I think there's quite a bit of production possibility there.
There are several very long-standing groups that have been doing production for a long time. There is One Fine Day Films, which has just started about 3 or 4 years ago. They do workshops every year and produce a film every year in Kenya. Some have been very successful, like Nairobi Half-Life, which is like Kenyans call it the best film we've seen so far about Kenya. And then there's been a lot of older films by people like Judy Zinge, who's also here at TIFF with her film. So yeah, there's an old film culture, but somehow it's not very, there hasn't been a connection with the locals with the films. So film is seen as this kind of high, separate kind of media from what people watch. So most Kenyans watch a lot of Nigerian films and soaps, Mexican soaps.
Okay. So this is quite specific.
Yeah.
You said it's a love story. I don't know if you saw the film, but it's to maybe summarize. You can tell me if I'm doing it wrong. It's a guy who's always watching the girl across the road from him, and he takes pictures of him and imagines to be together with her, and then in quite a fantasy. That's why the sci-fi notion and sci-fi way. How did you come up with that story? Is it autobiographical?
He is a photographer.
Yeah, it doesn't help that the character is a photographer, so everyone asks me whether this is a story about myself. Yes and no, in the sense that I guess by the time you're, I don't know, 17 or 18, you have fallen in love with someone who can't return that. I think it's a human experience. So it's personal in that sense, but it's also not personal in the sense that it happens to everyone.
And the science fiction element, I mean, it's quite a strong, the film has quite strong visuals, a quite strong aesthetic. How did you come up with that?
I am a kind of a sci-fi and fantasy geek. I grew up reading comics and all those kind of geeky things. So my stories and my visuals tend to be kind of removed from reality, which has been problematic sometimes because there's that thing that people say African filmmakers should be very aware of where they're coming from, be kind of realistic, because there are so many things that need to be talked about in a realistic sense. And so fantasy is kind of seen as kind of waste. That's a strong word. It's seen as a luxury, yeah, to do fantasy. Yeah.
But then, on the other hand, there is the Afrofuturism movement, which originated in the United States of Africans or African Americans addressed the black body, and Sun Ra, the musician, being one of the founders, one could say, of the Afrofuturism movement, to think about where to go next for the Africans. And it's a very sci-fi idea, fantasy idea of a spaceship coming and picking up all the Africans and bringing them into space in another world. Do you feel like your movie is a bit in the tradition of Afrofuturism?
It's interesting that the word tradition of Afrofuturism, tradition is a word that connotates kind of a long practice. Whereas I feel like Afrofuturism as it stands now seems to be very, very new in the sense that it's only now that Africans have started to claim Afrofuturism as something that they can practice. It's always been something that seemed very Afro-American. And I think that it is that guilt about wasting time with imagination, and that would make Africans not very interested in Afrofuturism, because even if you look at our education, especially in Kenya, it's very practical. It's engineering, it's finance, and people who do arts and such things are considered to be kind of wasting time. So yeah, Afrofuturism and the imagining future is not something that Africans are necessarily do.
But that is like a general perception. What is your take on that?
My take is that, of course, I think if there's anywhere where people should be imagining the future, it should be Africa, because we desperately need to be aware of the choices that we're making right now. We're making big decisions with where we get our money from, who's building our roads and all that stuff. So if we don't think about the future with these decisions, then our kids are going to do some complicated problems. So yeah, if there's anywhere where people should be imagining, it should be Africa.
Interesting. Vincent, you made you're from Soweto, South Africa, which is a township with a particular history. South Africa also has a very particular history, obviously, with apartheid. and in your film Berea, you chose to portray a white, old Jewish man who lives in Berea, which used to be a white Jewish area and has changed a lot in the last years. It's now a dominated area by black immigrants from the continent. How did that, I think it's quite unusual that a Sowetan makes a film about a white old Jewish man. How did you come into that?
It's purely fascination. It's like, and just you know, trying to understand the next person, the next human beings and where they are. Because when we were brainstorming, you know, the brief, which was tell a story about your city, one thing that we knew that we didn't want to do is to tell a story about the buildings, you know, the physical city. We wanted to tell a story about a people, but there's a danger again trying to tell a story of people of Johannesburg, because you know it's a lot of responsibilities and people are different. One thing that was evident was that, you know, Johannesburg has evolved and there's lots of cultures from everywhere in the continent, and so that was one element. The other element was like, you know, what sticks out of Johannesburg if you observe, and you know, it's how there's now very few white people that live in Johannesburg in the central district, business district. And when you see few white people that are still there and are old, it was a matter of saying, I wonder what do they think of this place, because they've seen the place during its heydays, and they see it now when there was a political transition, and now when there's an economic you know, dilapidation, and you thinking about, you know, we are all influenced by our backgrounds and our experiences, and then you thinking, how would it be like for an old white guy who was taught that, you know, he's superior than the black person? How are they feeling? And seeing all these changes and now being stuck to live with people that they previously were not allowed to be with, but the economic situation are forcing them to stay there, and an immigrant who comes from somewhere in the continent as well, who comes to Johannesburg to want to survive, because, you know, as there's not a lot of opportunities in Johannesburg, but it's still, you know, without doubt, still better than most countries, most cities in the continent. So it was a matter of being fascinated by these two souls that found themselves in this place. And you know, I may be from Soweto, but I'm just like, you know, I'm a human being. I try and understand how other people are feeling, and it was really a fascination about that. And so Berea was really an attempt to try and understand that as well.
Yesterday, after the premiere here, after the screening, somebody said to me that in the Canadian context, where racism is, I'm not sure, I'm just repeating it, is a bit of like a no-go area. It's something that people say almost doesn't exist, or they feel it doesn't exist. It was quite shocking for them to see it addressed in such an open manner. Is that something you feel about the film, that it's about racism and xenophobia?
I was very uncertain, and I had lots of doubts in projecting what I actually felt about racism in the film, because part of me was like, let me talk about racism. And another part was like, well, it's more complicated, it's very dynamic, it's got layers. Talk about the emotion of the man, and maybe that would come out. And I'm still in doubt even now whether, you know, I managed to achieve any of the two. So I guess the film is also a reflection of, you know, whether you want to, the artistic Vincent that wants to talk about racism, and or the, you know, just the person who represents the views of many people, who wants to just like outright talk about racism. But generally, and it's not normal in South Africa, in the entire South Africa. I mean, the city that Steven lives in, I mean, you see racism blatantly, and people they don't have the courage to talk about it. And then you see it even in the economy of people. You'll see white people where they live, you'll see colored people where they live, and black people where they live, and you can see the economics of those places. And even when you walk into, you know, into shops or anywhere, you'll see most of the time the black people are the laborers, and maybe the middle people would be the managers, the colored people might be managers, or they'll be on top of black people, and then the white people are all, you know, living good and living well. In Johannesburg is changing, it's more dynamic, and I think black people there just want to talk about it. They just want to talk about it and let it be known. And it doesn't matter in terms of the class level you are in, whether you are poor or you're middle class or you're rich. There's just this energy, and I can't, you know, the other day I was thinking about it actually, like what makes that, and I still haven't put my finger on it, but just generally people talk about it. They talk about race, sometimes to a point that it terrifies people that are outside of Johannesburg when they hear people talk about race the way they do in Johannesburg.
So if I can just add, besides the city I live in, I think it's a good thing that we're talking about it. I think, you know, a country that's been through so much trauma, we've got to deal with it. And you know, in South Africans, we often have our emotions on our sleeve because it's still quite raw. Whereas I find when I travel to other countries there, I'd see a lot of racism, but it's kind of subdued. The conversation is quite subdued. So I think, you know, I think this will go on for another generation. At least this dialogue around this big problem.
So you're mentioning traveling to other countries. How was it for you as executive producer to work with these two and the other? You don't have to comment on these two, with the 6 filmmakers from 6 African cities.
That's very easy. There were no problems at all. No, I think it was, I mean, we started off by having a 1-week script development workshop at the Durban Film Festival. So I think that was really important to spend a week together and build relationships and understand the different personalities and the strengths and weaknesses. So I think that really helped onwards because, you know, we couldn't travel all the time. So a lot of it was on Skype or on kind of broken telephone lines or emails. So I think we started building that relationship back in Durban. And yeah, it's, you know, the reality of making short films is that you're not really going to earn a living out of making short films. And people have lives, they have to do other jobs to survive. So in terms of getting things moving, you know, you're competing against the reality of people's lives, that there's distractions. But I think the fact that we managed to produce all the films within 1 year from starting the workshop meant like it is possible to turn something like this around within a year. But I won't tell you all the kind of tough stories right now.
Vincent, how was it for you, the production process? I know you have Africa First, and Keisha is in the room as one of your supporters. Did you have to get other funders for the film?
Yeah. I think because, you know, I have done some TV work, fiction work, but TV, I guess it differs from country to country. But I know if you really want to tell, if you really want to make films for cinema, you need to find or to source help from different people, and I mean, Africa Fest was important for us because they've got a panel of experts who've seen so many films, and some of them have made films and they know a lot about it, and the same thing that happened with African Metropolis. So you constantly are looking for almost like a guiding book, but who are human beings that can guide you through certain things. I mean, by pure nature of being an artist, you have your independent thoughts and what you want to do. But the truth of the matter is that this is, you know, it's a medium that some people have mastered and they know a lot about it. And you know, you need help. And I was saying to somebody yesterday when I was watching the film, and I was like, then you understand why people were asking certain things and were saying, oh, don't use that, because, you know, reality hits because you see the mistakes, you see the thing. But what I appreciate most about it is that it gives you a platform to make mistakes and learn from it and build from there, you know. And one thing that they keep saying to you is that even these experts or the experienced people, they still make mistakes even today, and that's just the nature of the industry, you know. It's like it never stops. So you constantly are trying to learn, you are constantly seeking advice, you're constantly seeking support, and support in many ways. Sometimes it could be an emotional support, sometimes it's a financial support and so on. We were a bit lucky because Johannesburg has got a film commission, so we were able to get some assistance from them as well. And so we had African Metropolis, we have the GFC and Africa Fest, and then last minute when we were tight, and the National Film and Video Foundation came through and assisted us as well. But I think, you know, you always appreciate every little cent you get. But I think the most support was the person-to-person support, the guiding through, which I think I needed more than I did before. You know. And you'd think that now that you've made this short film and you know you're a little bit more experienced, but you realize that more and more you need other people to give you feedback and guide you through your vision.
Jim, I know you were part of a band called Just a Band, and you just had a breakup 2 months ago, and now we hear that you have a new band with your imaginary twin, I think. We're trying to still find out from Jim.
Every day we ask him.
We ask him, are you the good twin? Is the other one the evil twin? Yeah, he's still working through it. But I think I believe you also made the music or the soundtrack of the film. Is that right? And was that very important to you, being a musician?
Because of working in many mediums, I'm always used to making everything myself. And so the question of making the music for the film was easy because even when I was shooting, I knew what sounds would go, you know, where. So it's a way of working that I've always had, where I rely very little on other people, and that's because also in Kenya there's very little specialization. Like people don't say I am a film sound maker. You have to generalize because there's usually not enough work to keep people in one field. So most people who work in film in Kenya are kind of You have to learn how to edit your own work, you have to learn how to shoot your own work. Yeah, so that was the way I made it.
I think both films actually have quite strong visuals, very like quite a unique visual language. Can you maybe both comment on was that movie in your head the way it's shot, or how did that come together?
This was the first time that I let the camera go and let someone else shoot. So that was interesting in terms of having someone else, you know, change the lens. So
I think you made music videos before.
Yeah. So so that was interesting, kind of letting someone else take care of that and focusing more on the acting. And so in a sense, the visuals are new for me also. There are many things I suspect I would have done in a different way, but this was good to kind of let someone else do that.
And for you?
Yeah, I come from you know, documentary filmmaking, and then you know, when you started, you really just wanted to tell a story, and I just used to pick up a camera and just shoot, and I didn't even know what is focus, what is iris, I knew very little. I had to, you know, to maneuver the camera to get it to the point, and when it's there, I would lock it. But when the light changes, I'd get into trouble because I didn't know what to do next. So my point of departure of telling stories was out of necessity, more than out of the stylistic or the aesthetics. And so when you develop more and more, you kind of realize how important and how does the visual representation of the product, how important it is to the story. And I think here was my first time or attempt to try and give myself a kind of a language that I wanted. Because of my character is a lonely old white man who's locked himself almost in a room. And it needed to say something about quietness and silence, and about a man who's fragile. And I thought, you know, to give it a style where you have wide, very locked-on shots, where you allow the viewer to see the person the way they are and not cut quickly, was important to me. So it was an attempt to try and give it a film language. And that's why I had to give it a visual style that would stand out. Yeah.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Jim?
Would you mind just identifying yourself?
Oh, yeah, Warren Controller from the City Institute at York University. I liked the comments about making the film to tell a story about the city. And I'm wondering what your love story says about your city.
Yeah, that was. I was really worried about that going into the script, Steven, and I wondered whether a love story would be would incorporate aspects of the city in a way that was relevant to the idea of African metropolis. The film starts with the idea of Nairobi kind of collapsing, like some kind of sci-fi alien invasion kind of thing at the beginning. So that was interesting to me because I like apocalypse things because I think apocalypse scenarios are great in terms of changing human beings' priorities, like the things that you think you're going to do when you're 30 or you're 40, it's like now you want to do them now. And so in a way, I was using that scenario to make this guy want to do something about how he feels for a girl. So yeah, the city is kind of a character in the sense that it's this place where he's lived, and it's this container for his life. I think of cities as containers for people's little stories.
So if I could just add my 2 cents worth, I think for me what was interesting was that often if you think of African cities, you think of these kind of bustling, noisy, chaotic places. And what we found interesting about Jim's film, it kind of flipped it on its head, and it was about the city emptying out because of this looming disaster. And also just you know, if you think of all disaster movies you've seen, it's normally New York or the White House is about to be blown up or something, and you know, or it's Tokyo or London. We don't make films in Africa, or there's no films where he's making apocalypse. Why can't we do it in Africa also? So I think it was interesting to explore that and have this concept of a city emptying out as opposed to this kind of cliche of the bustle of an African city.
I'm a film student. Thank you very much for the panel discussion today. I wanted to know, when it comes to applications, or sorry, calls for applications, like the way you set it up, but maybe when it was more open, how do you determine whether someone's project is good enough or bad enough when they haven't done anything prior? Like with Jim, you said, well, not that you haven't done anything prior, here, but you hadn't done anything film specific. That's what it sounds like. How do you know that he was going to be a good fit?
Well, look, there's always a risk attached to selection, and unfortunately we didn't have the budget to fly everyone to meet them all. So it was, you know, what we watched of Jim's was his music videos, which are, I'll probably describe them wrong, but they were these kind of tongue-in-cheek blaxploitation, kind of like messing with the genre. Okay. And we looked at other filmmakers who were more established from Kenya, who'd done more work, but we found Jim's the most surprising, unusual, and kind of risky, and that excited us. Okay. The fact that it was, he didn't come through the kind of filmmaking system, he was kind of out of left field, and that was something we thought was really interesting. And you should look at his music videos like that.
And just to add on that, the idea of African Metropolis was to make movies about Africa that do not support the usual cliches. So in a way, Jim was, on the other hand, not such a surprising choice because we wanted those other stories. But then it's true that when we talked about Jim, it was very much like, he's a risk, but let's take it. And we're happy we did. I think it's good.
Just a comment and perspective from a member of the public, that's my perspective, is why don't we have more films from Africa educating us, people who are ignorant like me, about the way families live, poor, middle income, high income, in the city, outside the city, corporation, green, everything that we deal with in America, how are they dealing with in Africa today in 2013 and the vision for the next 10 years. Those topics are so much speaking to many of us. Like the title would say something to that effect and the preview. Because honestly, we are in the stage of the brain, like we are interested in, many of us, you know, culture, education, issues that we're dealing with today and in the next 10 years or so. So I'm just giving you my own personal opinion because we are filmmakers and hopefully think about how we do a survey and find out what we want to know about Africa.
Well, I wish there were more people like you in the world because I think what I find making films and trying to get them and getting them into the North American market, it's extremely difficult and people are generally very disinterested in Africa.
That's not true. Well, I disagree because I speak to many people because I do that, and so many white middle class Canadians, Americans, you name it, go to Africa. So many, it's a fever.
I agree with you, but they go to Africa to look at animals and line beaches often.
Humanitarian work. Humanitarian work.
No, of course, but it's actually, maybe it's just the films I've been involved in, but speaking to distributors and commission editors and buyers in this region, generally getting an African film into cinemas here is an incredible achievement. It is very seldom you get an African film in a cinema, and then it's normally a niche. It's seen as quite obscure art house. It's like very difficult to get attention, and on television, it's even more difficult often because TV is a very conservative environment. And what I find in Europe and North America is that it's easier to get a film on Africa made by a European for the European audience, or the same in America, than to get an African film made by an African over here, because people often want to see their country through their eyes and not through the eyes of the people from that country.
Do you want to comment on that, Keisha? Because you're running the Africa First program at Focus Features.
Yeah. Well, part of, I mean, I echo Steven when I say I personally believe that there are lots of people like you, and I know you see lots of people like you. And part of what we're trying to do, just to give background, because I'm probably talking into the air, I'm the executive director of the Focus Features after the first short film program. This program I started with Focus about 6 years ago, and we have for 6 years been giving 5 filmmakers each year $10,000 just making their short film. We also have, as Vincent mentioned, a panel of advisors that works with the filmmakers at our summit weekend, and then throughout the year as they make their films. And part of actually what's helped, I mean, that part of, I believe that there are people here who want to see more African films made by Africans. And the great thing about working with Focus is that it sort of helped break a stigma a little bit. It's like, oh, Focus is interested, so what's happening here? Like all of a sudden people, you don't think about like, oh, I have to watch this film because it makes me a better person. So all of a sudden like, oh, Focus is interested, let's see what this is. And we've been able to start expanding people's idea of what African cinema is. I think part of the problem is that where people think, how people see African cinema is a very, very small, very specific, often very rural idea of like people in bushes and huts, maybe, you know, right. And not to say that that's not also part of what it is, but it's like saying American cinema is only what Michael Bay makes. So yes, it's part of it, but it's certainly not all of it. So it's also about, it's just educating audiences, and then also educating the marketplace. It's almost like the audiences tend to be ahead of the marketplace in terms of the business side of it, and it's about educating distributors, the commissioners, the programmers in a market sense about that these films are interesting. You have people who you need to show movies to who want to see this movie, and as we make this relationship work, then it can be interesting. So it's about breaking the stigmas and just educating the marketplace of the business side, because I think the audience is there. That's why we're doing this work, is to sort of connect those two, to bridge the gap between the audience and the filmmakers and the marketplaces in the middle. So that's really where the work is. The audiences are there. The people are there. The people who produce things or get things to the marketplace, the distribution network, that's actually who needs the most education.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've already asked. Okay. So if we're talking about like African films and blah, blah, because I don't know, the way I see it, it's pretty interesting. On the African continent, you have this great paradox of amazing stories to tell. Of course, untapped market is compared to like Hollywood or something like that. But it requires a lot of money, which we don't always have. We end up going to outside countries to make it. But then you obviously have the Hollywood people, blah, blah, blah. They've made this great feat of turning over horrendous films, but very many of them, with very little money, without very much time. And the interesting thing about African Metropolis is that it's somewhat like a happy medium between the two. You get the high quality and you get the quick turnover. Is there no space for short films on the African market at all? Like you were saying earlier, that you can make a living, but it sounds like a model if we can find a place to actually show them to audiences that's fruitful.
Well, yeah, thank you for your compliment. I think I think wherever you go in the world, short films as a commercial viable medium is difficult. It's more seen as a part of developing your career or calling card for a feature film. And the concept behind this was to do a kind of show them as an omnibus, show them as a group of films around a theme, which can hopefully find more spaces in the marketplace, or at least at festivals, etc. So this is our first international outing, so we're kind of discovering as we go along. But in terms of within Africa, I mean, just to give you the reality in terms of traditional four-wall cinemas, there's 800 cinemas, as you know, like cinemas here, 800 cinemas in the whole continent, and 700 are in South Africa. So that is the kind of distribution reality that we faced with. There's a lot of kind of like informal cinemas, video tech, like very small type outfits, which are mainly showing Nollywood and soaps, etc. So, you know, we have this big challenge of not having a serious exhibition infrastructure on the continent. But at the same time, because of the internet, etc., there's potential to kind of still find new ways. And short films, funnily enough, lend themselves really well to the kind of new technology. I mean, we've already been approached by mobile companies and all kinds of people who want to try and use the films on that new medium. So I think television is very viable because we can show them as like a feature. Then we will find a home on television. And the DVD, we're producing a DVD in 5 languages, 5 official languages, the 4 official languages of Africa plus German. So, you know, I think hopefully in a year's time I'll have a better answer to that question. But I think it's building blocks. We need the infrastructure, but, you know, we will in South Africa try and show the film in 2 independent cinemas and get the press there, get them reviewed, etc. But I don't think one should look at short films in general as a kind of commercially viable activity. I mean, I've produced about 35 short films, and I think 2 of them have made money. And that's pretty good going. So just, yeah.
I know it's sort of bad manners in this context to ask the question, but who cares about the rest of the world? We know we're going to have a market of 2 billion people in Africa by 2050. Shouldn't the focus at this point be on building the infrastructure, on opening the borders, on making sure that there is the flow through between the market in Nigeria and the market in South Africa? Having just done some research for a fairly big piece I'm working on about Nollywood, the complaint time and time again is there's no flow through between South Africa and Nigeria. There's all these blocks between doing trade in Nigeria and South Africa that is shutting down almost every industry on the continent, but film in particular. Shouldn't the focus, never mind the rest of the world, who cares? Shouldn't the focus be on building the infrastructure that's missing in Africa at this point? I
think you're absolutely correct that but I don't think it should be completely exclusive, because I think you know, it's not just in filmmaking. If you want to fly from one country in Africa to another, you often have to fly to Paris or London. You want to try and get visas, and it's really complicated doing trade and cultural exchange on our continent with all these kind of artificial borders that have been created by the West. So I think we're still dealing with that legacy, and I think there is a major need to kind of build this network. You know, I think there are pockets of activities leading to that. Lien mentioned earlier, I was involved in a film called Viva Riva, and we released the film in 20 countries, and we're now building a network of cinema spaces across the continent to start regularly releasing films through that network. So it's pretty, I mean, it sounds, you say 20 countries, it sounds very impressive. The reality is it's often a small venue with 50 or 100 people, but it's a start, and you know, one can build on that. So I think there are some initiatives to kind of build more cinemas, build infrastructure, but you know, if you look at what's happening in Africa economically, and I'm certainly no expert, you know, the Chinese are doing massive investments, and it's mainly around kind of roads and schools and refineries, etc. Cinema is not on the top of the list.
But ICT is.
Exactly. So right. there is potential there, especially with short form material, and that's, you know, what I was saying is, you know, when we started this project, we just, you know, wanted to make these good short films and get them out there. We didn't really have enough time to build relationships with mobile companies, etc. But now they're approaching us because they are desperate for content, for content, and they are because mobile companies cross borders. it's obviously within their interest to be involved in content that crosses borders. So, you know, hopefully we'll be doing this again in the future, and obviously tie up those relationships a lot earlier to ensure that there are these kind of platforms where the films get widely seen. But I still think, you know, for us what was really important was that there was also African money in this project. The Goethe-Institut were the main funders, but we managed to get the GT Bank on board, which is a big bank in about 7 countries in Africa. So for us it was important to start saying to other corporates, you need to start investing in culture and supporting content from the continent. So I think you know, that was also important, but I don't think one should totally dismiss the rest of the world. I think from a kind of artistic and recognition point of view, a lot of filmmakers have local success or even regional success, but have not had international success, and it certainly helps you locally if you have some international success. The fact that we here in Toronto, our countries and the bodies from our countries recognize that, there's media around it, it creates more awareness, it's perceived as a success, and you know, it can build role models, which I think can help create more support within our countries.
Just to add, but I think you're right about these borders and these things, but I think politicians are slowly realizing how important cultural exchanges are in the continent. And they are warming up to that because they see the benefits of that, both economically and human relationship. And if you look at the kind of music that people are making these days and across the continent, it's like you could see there's more similar elements in the music. There's more collaboration in the music, and it certainly happens with films as well. You'd find an actor from another country would be in a soapy in another country. So which is exciting about the continent, because I think the continent is opening up to the idea that maybe we are better off working amongst ourselves. And certainly I know in my country that, you know, there's a big push in making sure that South African artists and filmmakers are collaborating with other countries. It's just a matter of really putting it into paper and making it a law or something. But if it doesn't happen, already there's a big movement of artists that are doing that. Yesterday we were at the dinner party and we were talking about Fokken, which is a hip hop group in Ghana. Somebody was from Ghana. And then I realized, and I was like, wow, you know, Fokken, it's still kind of underground in Ghana, but I know in Johannesburg it's big. And it was that one moment, that realization, that, well, because she said, well, they're not really known in Ghana, or they're not loved. And I was like, that's funny, because in Johannesburg, there's a big movement of people that love that group. And they've never been to Johannesburg, at least as far as I know. But I know via internet and so on, people really like, like them. So that's a very positive sign, and I certainly agree with you that the continent needs to work with itself a lot more.
Can take one more question.
I just wanted to ask, considering your intention to take this to an international market, was there a worry that you were possibly picking stories that could be relatable in the Western countries and in Europe, and possibly a watering down of African cultures?
Is that true? No, I think it's a good question, and I think it's an ongoing debate. You know, you don't want to self-censor yourself. You know, the kind of agreement we had with the filmmakers was they had kind of final cuts of the films, you know, so we were, you know, part of our aim was to say we want to take your films beyond your country, and we want people to relate to your films beyond your country. So it was, I think, sure, there are those debates that go on, and you know, with short films, it's not a big economy. You don't need like an American actor to get it out there and all that type of stuff. But you know, we did have debates where we would say to the filmmaker, that might make sense to you, but it doesn't make sense to us. And so that's an ongoing process. But you know, I think you should watch the films and tell us what you think, if it does feel watered down or not.
I'll just add that that thing about do African stories, are they relatable in the West? I think maybe that's even a simpler question of are Africans the same as people from the West or whatever? Like when we wake up, do we have the same things that we worry about? I come from this generation where when Michael Jackson put out Thriller, we watched it. Like we watched it about 3 months later, sure, but we watched it, and like so all those cultural kind of monuments they were as important to us growing up. I was born and raised in Nairobi, so I'm kind of that generation that has a weird double identity where we're supposed to be one thing because we're African. We expect us to have all these types of things, but we, you know, like Lady Gaga puts out a new song and people are singing it where I come from. So there's that double identity thing that sometimes we are forced to do these false things where we kind of have to Africanize and kind of do all this savannah wildlife things. But really, it's very likely if you come to Nairobi, you can meet Kenyans you've never seen wild animals. Yeah, so I guess human stories are the same. Yeah.
I think that's a great ending.
Yeah.
For the panel. Thanks a lot for coming through. We have a reception for African Metropolis at 5 o'clock at the Milestone Bar. So since you dragged yourself to the panel, all welcome to join us there. And then if you haven't seen the movies yet, there's a press and industry screening today at 8:30, and then tomorrow at 9 o'clock again at the Jackman Hall in the morning. So we hope to see you at one of the screenings, and thanks again for coming, and thanks a lot to the Goethe-Institut Toronto for having facilitated this and helping us Africans to join Toronto in such a great manner. Thanks a lot.
I saw the films last night and I thought they were great.
Oh, thank you.
They were so interesting. They were such a, well, they were different, but they were also connected.
Great. Please spread the word.
Yeah.